Yeah, hi there. These comments are from my first year composition students here at California State University, San Bernardino. And one of you sent me an email, or actually you went to my YouTube channel. Nobody's ever done this. You went to my YouTube channel, you watched one of my videos, and then you made a comment in the video. It says, can you explain the reflection part of the assignment? Right? So the answer is yes. I can certainly do that. Alright, so let's take a look here. So we know that this is a two-page assignment, the reflection part, or part 3 of the assignment, right? So we know that. And what we want to do now is I'm going to give you a basic idea of how you might approach each of these assignments, or these parts. So let's say part A. So you're saying, considering race, gender, politics, and class, how are the two discourse communities similar or different? So remember that we are referring to the newspaper community of the SB Sun and then our first year composition classroom. So we want to make comparisons in those areas. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, let's see how A looks like. And the point is, both A and B, you need to have a pretty tight, what's called a compare and contrast type organization. And as I was saying in class, you guys can actually use what's called chunking, which means you can talk about the one community first, the second one next, and try to keep it pretty structured. So what does that look like? So if you take a look at A, this is what I'd like you to do, is you simply put A and then you have a paragraph here. So notice the beginning, I have a topic sentence. It says, our first year composition community and the San Bernardino Sun newspaper community are different in terms of politics and race. That is my topic sentence. You should have topic sentences for each of these paragraphs that you are writing. And that helps the audience kind of understand what you're trying to do there. You see that? So now it says, since all of us in our classroom are students between the ages of 18 and 20 years, we tend not to be very involved in politics. In fact, a relatively small percentage of young people are interested enough to even go to the polls to vote in a presidential election. In addition, our class tends to be lower middle class, with perhaps a small percentage of students who might be considered upper middle class or rich. Right? Now, the next thing, the point is, so once I've said some things about politics and class with the first discourse community, then I need to say exactly, I need to mention exactly those points to the next community in exactly the same order. Check it out. However, and notice how I'm choosing to use this transition word, however, to show that there is a distinct difference of idea from this part of the paragraph to what comes before. However, those who read newspapers tend to be 50 plus years of age, and they are more actively involved in the political process. Furthermore, avid newspaper readers tend to earn higher incomes, and many can be considered upper middle class or even rich. Therefore, these two discourse communities seem to be very different when it comes to politics and class. So you see the next part here? So then I mention the second discourse community, and I also mentioned some of the characteristics here, and I show in this paragraph how they're different, and I even have kind of a summation type sentence at the end which kind of restates what the purpose of the paragraph is by saying, therefore, these two discourse communities seem to be very different when it comes to politics and class. You see that? So you should name them. Name these discourse communities right here. You see that? I've named them right there. And that's really what you want to do with part A of our project. Okay, let's look at B. So you say, considering language and form, how are the two discourse communities similar or different? You may want to pay attention to paragraphing, sentence style, vocabulary, use of sources, and any other relevant writing conventions. So, if you follow the previous organization, you'll be fine, right? Remember, chunking, compare, and contrast. So I'll make it easy for you. What if you take this topic sentence, you simply copy it, right? Then you go to B, and let's say that you find some differences here. So different how about this? Are different when it comes to paragraphing and sentence style. You see what I'm saying? Now if you put this, and maybe at the beginning you might say here, think about what I'm doing here, right? Why am I doing that? Right? If you go back to the assignment here, I'm taking some of the key words from the question and I'm stating them in the topic sentence. So it says, when it comes to language and form, our first year composition community and the San Bernardino Sun newspaper community are different in terms of paragraphing and sentence style. So what do you do now? First of all, you talk about the first year composition community just in two specific ways. You talk about the paragraphing and also the sentence style in this particular discourse community. Once you've done that, then you move to talking about the paragraphing and sentence style of the San Bernardino Sun newspaper. So here, you want to have a similar paragraph. You'll notice this first paragraph here, how many words do we have here? Let's take a look. So we have 154. I would advise the same thing. You may have approximately 154 words in this paragraph, and what you can do is specifically refer, as you're talking about the first year community, specifically refer to some paragraphs and some sentence styles in the textbook that we have and explain how it works. And then you can contrast that with the paragraphing and sentence style from some of the newspaper articles in the SB Sun newspaper. You see what I'm saying? And now you have finished part B of our assignment. Okay, so let's look at C. So if you look at the question, when you repackage the academic response as a letter, which issue did you choose and why? And what criteria or process did you use to limit your response to 200 words? Or how did you determine what to keep or delete? So if you look at that, and then you're writing this here, here's your topic sentence. You'll have two things. You'll say, I chose article 1, 2, or 3 because. So you explain which article that you chose. And I would take maybe half of your paragraph focusing around that, so maybe 50 words or so. And then the next part of the question, in order to limit my response to 200 words, I used the following process. And then you explain what you kept or deleted based on that process. Maybe you explain that in another 50 words or so. And then you will have answered, I think, part C of our project. So imagine all these paragraphs looking about like that. About like this. You see what we're saying? So you got A, you got B, you got C here. Okay, if you look at D here, it is still asking kind of A and B. It's kind of a comparison that you're trying to make here. It says, what are some of the most noticeable differences in terms of what can be said and how it can be said? So be sure to provide some specific examples to support your analysis. Now to make it easy, I just copied my topic sentence from my either A or B. So here's what I'm saying. Our first year composition community and the San Bernardino Sun newspaper community are very different in terms of topics discussed and the tone that the writers use. So the topics that are covered, that focuses on what they say in the two communities. And the tone, it focuses more on how they say it. So can you imagine that this paragraph is going to follow exactly the same structure as this one, except when you're talking about this, right, this idea here about the first year composition community, you will be talking about the kinds of topics, and you can focus maybe on the textbook here. That'll be a pretty good comparison. So you're comparing the articles that you read in the textbook with the articles that are published in the San Bernardino Sun newspaper. So that's what you do in the first part of the paragraph, is talk about the kinds of topics that you see in our textbook, right? And then once you've done that, then you have to move to some of the differences. Oh no, wait a minute. I'm not getting it exactly. I got to do two things here. So as I'm talking about the first year composition community, I talk about the kinds of topics in the textbook, and then I talk about the tone of the writers in the textbook, and then the tone that writers use when they're writing. So I'll give you a tip. A lot of the topics in textbooks, obviously, they're not local. They're not regional, even state type things. Typically topics in textbooks kind of affect our nation as a whole, and they might look at topics that are international in nature. Also, if you look at topics in textbooks, they typically do not focus on events as they happen, because textbooks are published every few years. They can't keep up with those day-to-day things, so that's what they do, right? So once you've talked about the kinds of topics that are discussed with the first year composition community, you should also talk about the tone. So writers in our textbook and in academic writing, we tend to use a more formal tone, right? You have to give some examples to illustrate that. Right? So once you've done that, then you move to talking about the newspaper community, in which case the topics are very, very different. They like to focus on local, maybe regional, national topics, and then things that might affect us as a nation, and they focus on topics as they happen on a day-to-day basis, which is very different from what we've already said in this paragraph. Now, also the tone. In newspapers, it tends to be less formal. So writers tend to write in that manner in the newspaper community. So what you have to do here is you have to write approximately 100 to 150 words illustrating these points that we stated in this particular topic sentence. And that's how you want to answer Part D of the reflection. Okay, let's take a look at this last one. So which of the two communities do you feel more a part of? Why? And what could you do that would better prepare you to become a more meaningful contributor to one or both of these communities? So this one is very easy. I mean, if you restate the question, the beginning part of the paragraph, you say, well, I feel more part of the, and then state either the first year composition community, discourse community, or you can talk about the San Bernardino Sun newspaper discourse community, and then you put because. And then you give some reasons there. Try to spend about 50 words explaining why you feel more part of that community. Once you've done that, then you say, well, to become more part of the, then state whichever community you didn't mention here, you want to state it here. So if you state, for example, if you talk about the first year composition community here, then you talk about the San Bernardino Sun newspaper here. And again, take about 50 words. And that is how you answer the reflection part of this assignment. So remember, I didn't put any quotes or anything in here, but as you do research, if you do any kind of research to help you answer A, B, C, D, or E, make sure that you use in-text citations, and you will also need to have a works cited section to refer to those sources.